99.9% of Amazon advertisers focus on acos, or revenue and orders for those launching new products. While those metrics have their place, managing ads based on them is like driving based solely on how the highway is painted and ignoring the road signs. How do you get to your destination?
I'm David Goldenberg, and I've been in digital marketing for over 20 years. I recently led the marketing for a seller who grew from 30 million a year to 57 million a year. Still work with them through my agency. And
what I want to talk about in this video is why these metrics are flawed. I want to look also at conversion rate and average order value and explain to you why those ones are flawed as well. And what's the better alternative? There's a few better alternatives, and I want to talk about them. I want to explain why those alternatives actually determine who can rank number one on Amazon search results organically. Okay, that's a very impactful question because many of us are advertising primarily for the sake of the organic rankings. So acos, tacos, and orders and revenue are each useful, but they're flawed. Now, what's the problem with acos? So acos, just so we're on the same page, ad spend divided by your revenue, right? What percentage of your sales is going to paying for your ads? It's used as a rule of thumb to measure advertising profitability. If your product margin is 30% and your acos is 20%, great, you're profitable. Your sale didn't eat your whole gross margin. And if your margin is 30% and you had an acos of 50%, you've got room to improve. It's quickly apparent, though, that you can manipulate acos. You can game it, depending on what language you prefer, but you can bid the minimum of 10 cents. And if you get any clicks, any sales, obviously you're going to have a super low acos, right? The catch is that the volume is also going to be tiny. Maybe you can sell $2,000 of goods in a month at a 4% acos. But most people can't live on the roughly $600 of gross margin that gets them, to say nothing of the net margin at the end of the day. And you can do this also in the other direction. You can manipulate acos by having extremely high price. You can look really good if you sell, let's say, mattresses. If you sell bathtubs, you're selling for $1,000 average ticket, let's say. If you pay $1 a click, even if you convert super low, 1%, your acos is going to be 10%, which is extremely low by Amazon standards. But again, the volume is going to be very low because of basic economics. As price rises, demand decreases. A lot more people are willing to buy a mattress for $500 than for $1,000 or $2,000. So it's helpful, but it's not the whole picture. What about total acos or true acos, aka TACOS? So it's a step in the right direction of being more holistic, but in many cases it's inaccurate. Why is that? The reason is that when you advertise product A, anything in your catalog that sells is counted in the revenue afterwards. So you can advertise product A with a 30% margin and sell product B with a 20% margin. And even if you hit your target acos of 30%, you're actually in the red because you sold a product with a 20% margin, or the other way around, right? If you had a 20% margin product, let's say a 10-inch wall decor item, and you ended up selling the item that has a 30% margin, that's great. But maybe you could have also spent more on advertising, got a lot more sales in that case. And I've seen as much as 80% of the sales that were generated by the ad for A go to products B, C, D. And where do you account for that revenue or that profit anyway, or the loss? Which product is losing money? Is it the one that was advertised or the one that was purchased? And your target acos of 15% is going to look really different if you got a sale of a 20% product or a sale of a 30% product. So you can use acos at a product line level, where a product line is a group of products from the keywords or target audience overlap at least, let's say, 80%. But you need to know that your tools are reporting this in a way that assumes that if you advertise product A, you sold product A, and they're not digging into the reports to see what actually sold. So you need to take those numbers with not just a grain of salt, but I would say a good salt shake over there. Now, what about orders? What about revenues? They're not the be-all and end-all either, right? Even those of us launching products. Many sellers are willing to tolerate initial losses in order to gain reviews, to gain traction, get the product moving up in the organic rankings. What's the problem with this? What happens if you get the reviews, but you don't get the traction? Now what do? Right? So you've seen your orders, you've seen the sales accumulate, but you're not ranking. The orders don't tell you whether you should advertise more or less and so on. More importantly, how does focus on orders tell you whether your ads are working well or not? Maybe you can afford, let's say, 100% acos, but half of the ad spend is wasted because the ads are being mismanaged. Right? There are people who can't afford 100% acos, by the way. We were contacted by a supplement company, and they explained their business model is based on repeat orders. So, fine for them. But what if, in a case like that, you only need to tolerate really 50% acos because 50% was actually just going on wasted ad spend? So orders and revenue also won't guide you there. Now, what about conversion rates or average order values? Maybe the conversion rates would tell you, oh, you know what? This or that product, this or that ad is not converting well enough. We should advertise something else. It's true, that can help, but it can also be manipulated very easily. You want to optimize your conversion rate? Run a 50% off sale without doubling the price first. You want to optimize your average order value? Double the price. Again, your numbers are through the roof. And which one's better? Is it high conversion at lower prices, or is it high average prices and low conversion? Is there an objective right answer to that? I don't think you can find a serious advertiser who will tell you that there's objectively one better option. Depends on what your goal is, and depends on your strategy. Now, experienced advertisers will probably tell you that the right answer is to test. I think that there's a lot of wisdom in that. The question is, how do you measure the winner for the test? How do you determine the outcome of your study? Is it whichever one is just making you the most money? So I don't think that's a good answer, for the simple reason that the ad algorithm is almost never, ever going to exactly split your impressions 50%, 50%, right? So if this one gets an extra 5% more impressions and it gets more sales, I think you'd agree it'd be silly to favor that one just because the algorithm said, well, we're going to give this one a few more impressions and you got more clicks and sales. You would say that we would need each version to get the exact same amount of traffic, and then we can see which one made more revenue. But that doesn't happen. So how do you compare apples with apples? If I can translate this, the metric that really matters is revenue per click. You can also do this with profit per click. I'm just saying revenue to keep things simple, but you can play with your reports and calculate the real profit per click and go based on that. That's in fact what we do ourselves for our client work. That's a separate discussion though. So to keep things simple here, we'll talk about revenue per click, which is really the huge metric that determines who gets to rank first in the algorithm, and I want to explain that. The amount that you make per click determines how much you can spend per click. And so if you're making $5 a click and you're allowed, let's say, a 20% acos, so you can spend up to $1 per click, right? So your bid is going to be a little over $1. If you can make, though, $6 a click and your competitors are making only $5 a click, even if you can still only afford 20% acos, now it's an extra 20 cents more that you can afford per click. And so guess who's more likely to get that traffic? Well, provided that your ads are comparable, you're going to get the traffic over the guy who can only spend $1 per click. And so on, right? If you get $7, $8 per click, there are such large differences in the ads because not every advertiser knows how to do this as well as his competition do. And so if you can get that number up, you can spend more and you can basically take over the market. So that's a big part of what you want to focus on, and that allows you to tell the difference between winners and losers. It's better than just acos on its own because it allows you to say, hey, you know what, this is high revenue per click. We want to double down on this. It's not just, oh, we got a low ACOS because we spent very little, right? If you're getting the same placements, then it doesn't matter if you spent a little or a lot to get that. You just need to see which one made the most, which ad, which product, which keyword, whatever made the most revenue per click. And okay, you know, this one's better and that one is worse. This also allows you to integrate both your conversion rates and your average orders, because the revenue is basically average order times the conversion rate, right? So you're not able to manipulate it. If you bring the price down, so the average order value will come down and the revenue will come down accordingly, but your conversion rate will go up, and it'll reflect in the revenue per click, because it's reflecting the revenue. And if you do it the other way around, if you increase the price, you decrease the price, and the conversion rate changes accordingly, that's again going to reflect in your revenue. So what you can do is you can compare the revenue per click at both prices to tell if the change was worthwhile, right? Like I said before, also, you drop your bid, the revenue per click doesn't inherently get better or worse. Sometimes dropping bids will result in lower converting placements. That's something you really need to pay attention to if you went from getting traffic in top of search to rest of search or other placements, right? So definitely the conversion rates there vary, even though it's the same ad, and you need to be concerned for that. But if you're getting the same placements, right, then fantastic. You can just compare apples and apples and see this ad is more valuable, is working better, and this ad is not working as well. And so you can prioritize accordingly. What this helps you with understanding as well is your profitability. It's more useful than ACOS because the Amazon ads, like we said before, are sold on a cost per click basis. There's something else also that we talk about with Amazon ads providing insight for listings. That is, which keyword should you prioritize for your title? So if you have two keywords, okay, this one has, let's say, 10,000 searches a month, and this one has 10,000 searches a month. They both have 15% ACOS. Which one do you prioritize in your title? Obviously, the one making you more revenue per click. And similarly, if you started out with sponsored products and now you want to expand into sponsored brands, you can prioritize those keywords that already had a higher revenue per click. That's an easy way to prioritize what to focus on. There is a limitation, though, on revenue per click. It's not perfect, and I want to tell you what that limitation is. It doesn't reflect your click-through rate. It doesn't reflect the percentage of people who saw your ad and ended up clicking out of the total amounts of people who just saw your ad. So going back to our earlier question, should you prioritize higher conversion or higher average order value, we can add another criteria to consider. What about the click-through rate? What about the attractiveness of the ad to the client, to the person shopping on Amazon? So suppose your ad showed on the top of search placement 10,000 times and got 40 clicks. Okay, if you have a 20% conversion rate, that means you made 8 sales. Suppose you also average $50 an order. So your revenue per click is high. It's $8 times $50 an order. 8 orders times $50 an order times divided by 40 clicks. So 8 times 50 divided by 40 equals $10. That's very high. However, your total revenue is small, since nearly no one clicks on your ad. And that's where revenue per mille comes in, or RPM. That's basically your revenue per 1,000 impressions. So you divide revenue over impressions times 1,000. And what that does is it also takes into account your click-through rate, because it's the sales in comparison to how many times your ad was shown. Okay, and by comparing it to how many times your ad was shown, mille, by the way, is just French for 1,000. It's a term the ad industry uses for 1,000 impressions, and the reason we're using it here is because it's easier to grasp revenue per 1,000 impressions than for a single impression, because for a single impression it would be measured in pennies and fractions of a penny. Going back a minute to the previous example, If you had $400 in sales, over 10,000 impressions times 1,000, okay, that gives you $40 revenue per meal, right? For every 1,000 impressions, your ads generate $40. When you compare that to more standard sponsored brand ads getting 1% click-through rates or better, that's 1,000 impressions times 1% times 20% conversion rate times $50 average order value. That's $100 revenue per 1,000. And we've seen some of our really well-targeted ads get 2 and 3% click-through rates, which obviously does wonders for your revenue and for your revenue per 1,000. And this really allows you to compare how your ads are doing on the super popular keyword. I wouldn't use this for any keyword really generating less than maybe 50,000 impressions per month, right? So you need to be targeting really the super competitive keywords to use this. And I wouldn't use it on anything less than 50,000 impressions a month because it's so easy to go off a little bit higher, a bit lower. You get like one big order and then everything is crazy. But the point is, it's a very useful metric to get an idea how you're monetizing Amazon's traffic, how efficiently. So it's important to know how efficiently you're monetizing Amazon's traffic because you usually can get more people to search for your target keywords, right? Most of us are not at the scale that we're trying to increase the total market for our products. You can do search, find, buy, but obviously you don't want people to cost you a second ad click after you already paid for the first one. But out of those that are already searching, right, RPM allows you to figure out, okay, how many are clicking my ad and converting at this price versus that price, or at this conversion rate versus that conversion rate. But RPM is also not perfect, right? Like I said, it works only in like very popular keywords. And also it can get skewed if you have products that have super high click-through rates, right? We had one with over 1% click-through rate blended across all the placements, which is pretty high for that particular niche, that client. But the conversion rate was about 40% lower. So the impact is that on the one hand, because the click-through rate is so high, the RPM was very high. But because the conversion rate is very low, the RPC was also quite low. So what do you prioritize? Do you prioritize the RPM or the RPC? And so what we do in a case like that is we can try to multiply the RPM by the RPC to get a made-up number, basically, RPMC. And it's a way to rank and compare ads where some of the ads have a higher revenue per click and others have higher RPM. It's like being a sports coach where you have some players who are better shooters and some who are faster, and you're trying to get an idea who's the most well-rounded player. And you do this to basically see who's the best on average. Depending on your goals, you may prefer to use RPM, especially if you're focused on the market share for the top keywords. That's really useful because it's the most holistic metric. If you're focused on ad profitability, so revenue per click is your friend because it also helps you figure out how much you can spend per click. Okay, so the short version of all this, too long, didn't read. Too long, didn't read. Okay, acos, revenue, orders, conversion rate, average order values. They're helpful metrics in certain scenarios, but they're all flawed metrics because they can be easily manipulated or they only show you part of the picture. What you want is a more holistic view. And even though takeoffs is a step in the right direction, it can also really mislead you because usually it's assuming that advertising A sells A, and sometimes A sells B, and A and B have different margins. So instead you can use revenue per 1,000 impressions to focus on maximum revenue and market share, or revenue per click to focus on your profitability. Or you can use the combination of both to see what's best overall and improve your ROI. Okay, there are a variety of uses for this as well. If you want to compare keywords for your listings, which one should you prioritize? If you want to compare two different sponsored brand creatives and see which one you should prioritize because there's only that one spot at the top, for example.